Have you ever seen a shadow linger in the corner of your eye, seen a flashing light dart across the sky? Have you ever wished upon a candle to make your wish come true? I'm sure you've told a haunted tale or two. Are you interested in learning the pagan ways, witchcraft, grimoires, candles await? Have you ever seen the living dead and stood still instead of fled? Cryptics are fun, but the universe has our eye. The stars align, shows us our signs, and we're here to discuss the divine. Welcome to Moon Brews, a supernatural podcast, hosted by yours truly, Haley.
Research and recording of Canadian creepies happens on the shared land and traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples, many of whom continue to live and work here today. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties. A key treaty governing this territory is the Dish with One Spoon Agreement. This treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee people binds them to share and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, settlers, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. We all share the responsibility of ensuring the dish is never empty, meaning we must take care of the land and the creatures we share it with.
Welcome, wanderers, to Journey Down the Crooked Path, a place where the stories are stranger, the shadows stretch longer, and the things that go bump in the night might just be listening. I'm Amanda Joy, your guide into the eerie, the forgotten, and the downright bizarre. Here, we step off the well-lit roads of Canadian creepies and venture into the murky corners of history, folklore, and the unexplained, where the whispers grow louder and the truth is never quite what it seems. So let's take a deep breath, watch your step, and whatever you do, don't look back. Once you start down the crooked path, you never know what might follow.
Have you ever noticed how everyone has a different idea about what an alien looks like? Some people go straight for the big black eyes and the smooth gray skin. Others picture something with too many elbows. And then there are the folks who swear the classic version is the small green guy with the round head, the antennas, and the attitude of someone who knows exactly how to fly a ship that they definitely shouldn't have a license for. If you ask the people around Steep Rock Lake back in 1950, they'd tell you that their aliens didn't look like anything from a movie. They had their own version, and it came from an anonymous report passed through the local mine's newspaper. Not a distant light or shapes in the sky, but actual figures, small and green, moving around near the shoreline. Before we get into the lake itself, it helps to know that the report didn't come from telescopes or radar. It came from someone standing near the water, trying to make sense of what they were seeing, and choosing to pass it along instead of keeping it to themselves. Steep Rock Lake rests near the southern edge of northwestern Ontario, about 3 kilometers northwest of Atikokan. In the 1950s, this stretch of water in the middle of a dense forest became the backdrop for a story that caught the attention of people who followed reports of unusual sightings. Locals called the region the canoeing capital of Canada, and the lake was a part of that landscape. In 1938, an Ontario prospector named Julian Cross found a thick layer of hemonite beneath the lake. When the Second World War pushed demand for steel higher, the river feeding the lake was redirected and most of the original basin was drained. The diversion carved out new channels and left behind a fresh version of Steep Rock Lake. Once the water was removed, the crews blasted into the exposed ground and hauled out the iron ore, turning the old lake bed into Steep Rock Iron Mine. From the 1940s until the mine closed in 1980, a boomtown called Steep Rock grew just outside of the quarry close to Atikokan. A monthly paper called the Steep Rock Echo ran through those years. It was edited by the mine's chief chemist, J.B. Eaton, and it served the people who lived and worked in that temporary town. In September of 1950, the Steep Rock Echo carried a story titled Flying Saucer Base, sent in by an unnamed mine employee whom J.B. Eaton described as thoroughly reliable citizen. In September 1950, the Steep Rock Echo carried a story titled Flying Saucer Base, sent in by an unnamed mine employee whom J.B. Eaton described as a thoroughly reliable citizen. The writer explained that he and his wife had held back from telling anyone what happened because people made so much fun of anyone who reported things like this. He added that the rush of talk about flying saucers had died down, and that with the noise fading, people might be ready to think about the subject more calmly. He then introduced the account as what he and his wife saw in the dusk of the evening of July 2nd, 1950. That night, the two of them were out fishing on Sawbill Bay, that stretch of water across from the quarry on the other side of Steep Rock Lake. At the time, it was known as Sawbill Bay. Today, though, it goes by Marmion Lake. After spending a while on the water, they brought their canoe into a sheltered cove and ran it up onto the beach. They had finished their snack and a thermos of tea when the mine employee wrote that the air began to vibrate around them. His first thoughts went straight to blasting, the kind that pushes a wave of pressure across the ground. But then he dismissed it because they were too far away from any active work for that to make any sense. Trying to figure out where the shock came from, he climbed a nearby rock for a better look at the water. From that vantage point, he saw a large, shiny, saucer-shaped object resting on the surface about a quarter-mile away. Along its edges were round openings with black rims, each spaced roughly 4 feet apart. He signals for his wife to join him, and the two of them watch as this hatch opens on the top of the craft. 10 small, strange-looking figures crawl out onto the upper surface of the saucer. While the figures moved around on the top of the craft, an antenna rose from the center of the saucer until it reached about a height of 8 feet. A hoop-shaped ring capped the antenna and rotated from side to side with a slow sweep. The couple realized that the ring was turning towards their position. So they ducked behind a rock at that moment. He wrote that they believed that the rock shielded them from whatever the device was projecting. After waiting long enough to feel safe taking another look, they raised their heads again. One of the figures stood near the edge of the saucer with a bright green, open-ended hose. It drew in lake water and pushed out the same amount through the opposite end. They dropped back behind the rock before risking a final look. The next time they checked, everything on the surface of the craft had vanished from view. The saucer hovered about 8 feet above the water, and red and blue lights with a gold tint reflected across the surface below it. The craft tilted at about a 45-degree angle, and a rush of wind swept across the lake. A flash of yellow and red-blue followed, and then the object shot north faster than they could track it. The couple headed home in a state that left them certain they would never return to that part of the lake again. The man tried to move on, but the image of that saucer just stayed in his head. He eventually told a friend about what happened. The friend wanted to see the cove at Sawbill Bay for himself and agreed to go with him under the cover of a fishing trip. They brought cameras and planned to photograph the craft if it showed up again. But the saucer never appeared. They went back 2 more times with the same plan and came up empty. After that, they tried rowing along the shoreline to change their angle on the water. When that produced nothing, they crossed the bay using the canoe's outboard motor, hoping a wider sweep might give them a better chance. But then, and the mine employee wrote that everything unfolded in a burst of motion, the saucer was back in the same spot. He swung the boat into the wind while his friend lunged for his camera, and he reached for his own, trying to keep control of the steering at the same time. His hand was stiff from the cold and from gripping the control, and he could barely feel the camera. His friend tried to stand while the boat rose and dropped with the waves. Neither of them managed to take a photograph. The friend kept repeating, "Well, by George, at least I've seen it."
You. Still haunting the same old fast fashion? Time to dig up something better with Back from the Dead Goods, a Canadian small business where forgotten threads get a second life and sustainability meets spooky. This isn't just upcycled clothing, it's resurrected fashion with an eerie edge. Handpicked, reworked, and revived, every piece is as unique as a ghost story whispered at midnight. And because you're a part of the Canadian Creepies family, you get an exclusive deal. Use code Canadian Creepies at checkout for 10% off. Find them lurking on Instagram, Etsy, and Poshmark. Links are in the episode description. Give your wardrobe a second chance at life, if you dare. Looking for your next obsession? The Creators Collective Podcasts is your gateway to the dark, the chilling, and the downright fascinating. We're a community of independent podcasts with one goal: to share the best in true crime, paranormal tales, folklore, and unexplained mysteries. Whether you crave cold cases that won't stay closed, haunted histories that refuse to be forgotten, or stories that make you sleep with the lights on, there's a show waiting for you in the collective. And when you join us, you're not just listening to one podcast. You're stepping into a world of creators who love this stuff as much as you do. Check out the Creators Collective today. Follow the link in our show notes to discover your next favorite podcast. We'll be waiting for you. Let's take a moment during this break to talk about something that matters. Something that doesn't get to be background noise. The Anishinaabe-Moan word, Ni-ki-na-gana, means we are all related, and we are. But relationship isn't just about words, it's about responsibility. Canadian author Naomi Klein once said, "It is not enough to say that we live on Indigenous land. We have to act as if we do." And one way to do that is by supporting Pay Your Rent, a grassroots mutual aid initiative that offers direct material support to Indigenous organizers across this land. It's not charity, it's rent. For those of us who aren't Indigenous to this place, it's a way to show up differently, to redistribute some of what's been taken. The Pay Your Rent Fund started as a one-time request for help in 2018 and grew into a nonprofit called Ni-ki-na-gana. Your monthly or one-time donation can help provide food, hygiene supplies, housing support, and resources for Indigenous-led resistance and community care. So if you've ever said, "We're all related," ask yourself, are you being a good relative? Visit payyourrent.ca and find out more about how you can be part of something better. Now, back to this case.
He ended the account by saying that during the second encounter, he and his friend saw the small figures carrying out the same task with the greenhouse that he and his wife had witnessed on July 2nd. The figures reacted once they realized that they were being watched. They scrambled back into the craft, which lifted away at a tremendous speed. He suggested that the figure handling the hose didn't make it inside in time and fell into the lake when the saucer took off. Now, after the story appeared in the Steep Rock Echo, as with most cases like this, letters arrived from people who had said that they had their own strange encounters at Sawbill Bay. One writer described leaving the lake at dusk and hearing a sound like a flock of ducks, followed by what he thought was a shooting star streaking across the bay. The next week, while fishing in one of the coves, he came across several dead fish floating in a patch of water with a greenish tint. Another man sent in a story that matched the earlier account almost point for point. He told the editor that while heading home from the floodwaters at dusk, he saw what he believed was a meteor streak towards Bilsop Bay, and then it vanished. He added that one of the inlets in Upper Sawbill Bay had water with almost a fluorescent green tint, and he said that he couldn't catch a single fish there, even though he had no trouble catching fish anywhere else on the lake. Of course, not every letter supported the original writer. One reader asked whether the correspondent had been drinking tea or maybe something stronger. The article appeared again in the October 1950 issue of the Steep Rock Echo. In that edition, J.B. Eaton added his own remarks. He wrote that he could not verify the story either way, and that it came from a senior employee of the month. He noted that around the same time period, though, the flying saucers had been seen by several people in the area. Groups of men working at the Steep Rock mine had reported seeing them at night, and many residents of Atacocan gave eyewitness accounts. The report stretched from Steep Rock all the way to the lakehead cities of Fort William and Port Arthur, about 140 miles away. One sighting was relayed by Canadian National Railway station operators along the line until it reached Steep Rock, where the object turned back. Eden wrote that the eyewitnesses had no doubt about what they had seen. Because the Steep Rock Echo reached only a small readership, the story of Sawbill Bay saucer stayed mostly in the memories of the people from Steep Rock and Atacocan for years. That changed, though, in the 1960s, when Frank Edwards, an American writer and radio broadcaster, learned about the story. He likely came across the reprint in the February-March issues of Fate magazine and brought the story onto his radio program. He included it again in his 1966 book Flying Saucers, Serious Business. Other writers who focused on UFO reports followed his lead and added the Steep Rock account into their own work. Within a short span of time, the tale of the saucer and its crew from Steep Rock moved from a small Canadian mining town's memory into tabloid-level stories with readers far beyond the region. In the winter of 1974, UFO researcher Robert T. Badgley sent a letter to the president of the Steep Rock Iron Mines asking about the Sawbill Bay story. The president replied that the piece had been written by a mine executive named Gordon Edwards, unrelated to Frank Edwards, and that the entire account was invented. According to him, Edwards wrote it to amuse his colleagues and the residents of Steep Rock and Atikokan, and to poke fun at the Little Green Men reports that appeared in the newspaper from time to time. Edward and the others who knew about the hoax were entertained when larger media outlets repeated the story and spread it far beyond the area. Badgley's work never reached a wide audience, and the clarification remained almost as obscure as the original tale had been before Frank Edwards revealed it. Even with the debunking in place, the story of Little Green Men of Steep Rock Lake continued to circulate as fact in books and articles. Atikokan's own historical authorities went years without learning the truth. In a letter dated February 6, 1992, sent to an American researcher, Greg Montecapra, a representative of the Atikokan Centennial Museum wrote that after reading the articles, they asked several locals about the events and were told that they had been numerous other sightings in the area, and that this particular incident was the only one documented to their knowledge. Despite the efforts of researchers who tried to correct the record, the story of Little Green Men of Steep Rock remains one of Ontario's most enduring urban legends. Steep Rock wasn't the end of stories like this, far from it. Another account came from Newfoundland from a man who said that he saw something on the shoreline that matched the Steep Rock description almost detail for detail. His name was Alan Jones, and his encounter took place nearly 3 decades later. On the night of August 26, 1978, Alan Jones was walking near the Musgrave Harbor when he saw a glow coming from the ground ahead of him. He moved closer and made out the shape of a craft resting near the shoreline. The light coming off of it was strong enough to outline several small figures standing near the object. They were all about the same height and moved around the craft in a way that made him think that they were possibly working on something. Later, Jones said that the figures were shorter than the average adult and wore suits that reflected the glow from the craft. He watched them for long enough to be certain that he wasn't looking at an animal or people from town. The craft gave off a heat, and the air around it shimmered in a way that he just really couldn't explain. He went to the RCMP after the encounter and reported what he had seen. The officer who spoke with him recorded the details and forwarded the information, noting the date and the location and the description of the figures, but nothing really came of it. The case ended up in the Canadian UFO catalogs as a close encounter report from Newfoundland, listed alongside other occupants and sightings from the late 1970s. But beyond this, we have no other details about this account. When people hear Little Green Men, they think of plastic souvenirs in Roswell or the kind of aliens painted on old movie posters. It's a joke, a mascot, something you buy on a keychain. But every so often, you run into a report that makes the phrase feel less like a punchline and more like something that might be standing a lot closer to home than anyone expects. Thanks for hanging out with me in Canada's darker corners. If you like this episode of Canadian Creepies, follow Valerie on Instagram and TikTok at Radio Valerie and on Instagram at Canadian Creepies. She's the one running the socials, posting behind-the-scenes clips, location shots, and early hints as to what's coming next. And if you want even more haunted history and folklore, check out my other show, Down the Crooked Path. It's on Instagram and TikTok as well, with a steady stream of strange places, old legends, and the kind of stories that never stay quiet for long. Come say hi, send in your own encounters, and help us keep the weird alive. Until next time, stay curious and stay creepy.